Good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, February 10th. This is the Mount Mansfield Unified Union School District Board meeting. And today we are having our first of two budget presentations for the community. As this one is part of a board meeting, the next one is not. So I'm going to do a quick agenda review, open up to community comments. At that point, we have the budget information, community budget information, and generally we do that as a conversation. So we allow community to participate and ask questions at that point as well. When we do this not as a board meeting, I would imagine we'll do that again today, so folks can ask their questions. We will appoint our new principal at Brewster Pierce, approve our previous minutes. If there is any other business, we have time for that. And then we do have a board executive session. Any adjustments or changes to the agenda? Pat, do you want to do a quick roll call for us?
Yes, sure. Tara Arneson.
Present.
Kevin Campbell.
He's driving, but he's here.
Yep, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay. Heather Chadwick.
Here.
Allison Clement.
Here.
Gail Conley.
Gail.
He's here.
He's here.
Stephen Diglio.
Nope.
Sorry, Stephen. Yep, I got you. Tom Fursto.
Here.
Edie Graining.
I am here.
James Granzow.
Here.
Susan Lillick.
I don't think she's going to be here tonight.
Okay.
Okay.
Sandra Limoges.
Here.
Ethan Maurer.
Here.
Stuart Morisot. Katie Nelson.
Here.
Lisa Pollock.
Present.
And student reps Abby O'Malley
Here.
and Eli Wimet.
Here.
All right, thank you.
Great. So community comments, if anyone has anything they want to share that is not about the budget, this would be a good time for that. And I would suggest that if it is about the budget, we hold that until we get to the budget conversation, because yes, we're going to have that as a conversation. Just looking for general agreement. Yes. Great. So any community comments not about the budget? Okay. I am not seeing any. We will have an opportunity to open it back up if we need to. And John, I'm going to turn it over to you and Nicole to take us through our budget presentation.
Thank you, Edie. We've linked a few documents to the agenda tonight. We have the summary of the proposed budget, the 2025-26 FY26 budget. The detail, both of those documents have comments, just explaining some of the pieces in there and the rationale for either a decrease or an increase. We have informational slides, and we also linked our annual report. We're going to make a couple adjustments there, but we will do that. Minor, very minor. Yeah, so what we thought we would do is Nicole and I, Fortier, she's the Director of Finance and Operations. We were going to run through our informational slides, see if people have questions on those, and see if folks have any questions on the summary, or really anything at all. Make sense, Edie?
Yes.
Okay. I like to stand up when I do these, so see what I'm gonna do. If you could pop that up there, Brad.
Slides, start the slides or something.
The slides, information slides. So these will be on our website. We're going to be recording this meeting for community members to watch it later and be able to ask questions. And we're hoping that a lot of people do, because there's a lot of important information in here. So in the presentation, we also link to our budget page, and there's a lot of information in there as well. I mean, we try to populate it with details and numbers and information that community members can access, ask questions, and use when they're deciding, how they're going to vote on March 4th. Next slide, please. So these are some challenges that we have had and considerations in this year's budget. I think the biggest one, which we'll dive into a little bit later, is our enrollment this year and last year did not change. It was relatively flat. We actually added a few more actual people to our enrollment, but our weighted ADM, and weighted ADM is students depending on their age, or if they're English language learners, or economically disadvantaged, they get higher weights. And our long-term weighted ADM or enrollment actually dropped by 120 students, even though the actual bodies in our schools did not, and our demographic did not change. So the reason for that is the AOE changed how they determine economically disadvantaged students from last year into next year. That's going to affect us. We have, I'll get into this a little bit later, but we have informed our legislators. We've also informed the Deputy Secretary of Education and the Secretary of Education. They've acknowledged that it's an issue, problem, oversight. They've shared that they can't do anything about it. But I did get a response from the Deputy Secretary of Education recently that she acknowledged the issue and was going to send something to the Joint Fiscal Office to have districts analyze that are affected by this and see if there might be some sort of legislative solution. However, that isn't going to really, it's highly unlikely that is going to happen before people vote. Okay? So this has been a big challenge. None of our doing, totally out of our control, but it's something that that we have had to deal with, during this budget session and budget development session. The other piece is, and this is for all school districts in Vermont, health insurance, the premiums are going up 11.9%, which is a lot. That's a significant driver for us. Health insurance is determined and negotiated at the state level. So we get, what the plans are, and we get what the premium share is going to be from the state. We're right now we have a placeholder for salary, but we're currently in negotiations for next school year with support staff and with teachers. So we don't know, we're negotiating at this time. We have a placeholder in there for salary, and that's something that's kind of, not what we like, but it often happens because we're always in the middle of often in the middle of negotiations. Next slide, please. These are, I think, the most important slides, the ones I'm going to show you now. So these are our preschoolers. And what the budget revolves around is really helping students to be successful, happy, be able to meet their own goals and aspirations in their families, and to be effective, engaged citizens. And that's part of our ENDS policy and our big long-term objectives. And these are just some pictures of our preschoolers. And I have the good fortune, I call it a blessing, that my office is right in the middle of two preschools. So when we've repurposed Underhill ID, right now we have Saxon Hill who rents, which helps with our education spending. And that's a preschool, that's a cooperative preschool. We have a birth to 3 program, a care program. Well, they also pay rent. That helps bring down our education spending. And then we have our 2 district preschools. So we have, at any given day in that building, we have 70 plus preschoolers. And today, I got an invitation for a tea on Thursday. This actually happened today. They all came, one of the preschools came to my office and gave me my own personalized invitation to have, they're calling it a specialty this Thursday at 9 a.m. I love them, I have to tell you. They're just the best little people around. And, when you watch them thriving and you understand how important it is for kids to have that sort of start and where they go, it's huge. And when I think about that, I think about how grateful I am to the community for supporting us with students literally 3 years old, to 18 plus. Some students go till they're 22 years old. And you can see here, they're starting to learn early math, early reading, how to get along with each other, how to share, how to be kind, how to work on a team, how to be cooperative. And I have to tell you, they're doing it. And it's going to make a difference. It actually saves a lot of money. Preschool does, and there's empirical data, significant amount of it that shows, you're less likely to be on an IEP, you're less likely to have health problems, you're less likely to be incarcerated, and so your whole quality of life, they've shown that, it really is affected by getting a really good preschool experience. And we are very, very fortunate to have some great ones. So it starts here. This is us. This is at the Fire Farm in Richmond. And that's almost all of our classes. And then here are some classes in the north and south end, students really engaging in learning and just working together to be effective, engaged citizens. Next slide, please. And these are our 216 strong graduates from last year. Some remarkable students in there. Our goal and what we're trying to do is provide them with the education and opportunities and care so that they can go out and get a job, if that's what they want to do, go to post-secondary education, go into the military. We have a lot of students that will take a year before they decide exactly what they want to do, and they volunteer, they travel, they help other people. I mean, I hear about it all the time. And then we have about 70% of our students that go on to either a 2 or a 4-year college. And so this great group of students starts at preschool and it ends here. Our graduation rate in the last few years has been between 95 and 98%, which is very high. And that's at a school that has pretty rigorous proficiencies. I think, would you, Abby and Eli, would you agree with that? I mean, there's work, and I had a professor from UVM approach me. This is a couple of times. Has told me this, that this person is a math teacher, and said that the students that are coming to them from MMU are well prepared, and that's really good to hear. They said a strong majority of them are very, very well prepared to take college level calculus. And so, the budget that we were talking about tonight goes to help these students and, make us all stronger and better. So we're proud of this group, very proud. So these are our budget drivers. Well, not our budget drivers, these are our targets. So we set some budget targets every year, and we look at what we think our student needs are going to be, what our enrollment is going to be, what we're spending to fix things in the buildings, what supplies and resources are costing. And this year we came up with, education spending, not to be over 4%, and the overall budget the same. So education spending is it's a very important number. So education spending is the spending that affects your tax rate. So it's the overall budget, and you take out any non-property tax revenue, and that's education spending. So that spending is the spending that influences your tax rate. So we met our targets this year. You know, the overall budget increase is 1.94%, and our ed spending is 1.32%. So we are pleased with that. And when we went into this budget year, we've talked about this a lot, you know, over the last year. Some of our primary objectives were to keep the budget as low as we possibly could without taking direct services and direct instructional opportunities from students. And I feel like we have achieved that. And we wanted to also really try to do everything we could to mitigate the impact on property taxes. Next slide, please. So here's our enrollment. And you'll see, you know, we're going down a little bit, but it's relatively flat. You know, we go up 20 or so students all the time. You know, I took some notes because I thought some folks might ask, but in the actual bodies, we're down about 21 students, which really could happen, you know, over, you know, several grades. You know, it fluctuates. But at the high school, we were down about 28 students, and we reduced 1.7 people, if you will, full-time equivalents, as in a response to that decline. With fewer students, we have fewer sections of subjects, and so we need fewer people. So we tried to take a look at what the student population was going to be like at the high school and adjust to that. As far as K to 4, really pre-K to 4, and then middle school, we're actually going up a little bit. It's flat. Next slide, please. So this has been a big hot topic in the news. Have you heard about class sizes in Vermont, everybody? Yeah, you know, in the papers and on the media, Vermont has, according to the Vermont Department of Education, has small class sizes. And so I thought it was important for our community members to know, okay, what are our class sizes? And we have solid class sizes. Now, I don't like to use the words low or high, but we got an educational profile report in, I think that was in August, and they said that the average class size per classroom teacher was 11.2, and these are ours: 17.6, 21.4, 18.1. The high school, you know, there are some, you know, it's a little bit different how you calculate it because you include art and music and everything. And the class size averages for elementary schools are really the classroom teacher, because the art teacher has the same ratio as the classroom teacher. So these are solid. And I have had several people over the last couple of weeks have said, you know, we've looked at your budget and we want to know, you know, how you've been able to keep your education spending and your budget low while we're having to, you know, to cut positions and we still can't reach, you know, the level that you are at. And I said, well, it's really 3 factors, big ones, probably a few more, but one is we don't have small class. We don't have 11.2 as our class size. Our class sizes are solid, and comparatively, you know, they're on the upper end in Vermont. And the other piece is we did not spend our COVID money on personnel. We spent it on training and resources, not reoccurring costs. So we have, you know, we haven't had to cut a lot of positions, you know, to get to where we are right now. The other piece is we have low admin to student ratio. So we looked at this a few years ago. Can't imagine it's changed much. That, you know, we had the lowest in the county, you know, admin to student ratio. So those factors, those are big factors in the budget.
Can you just talk about how we use multi-age classes to maintain relatively equal class sizes across our schools?
That's one of the benefits, but it's also, pedagogically, it's strong. What you're able to do is really balance class sizes and needs, when you have a multi-age system. And that has helped us for sure to be able to do that. And it's good for students. So, it's a win for us. Now at the high school, we have some classes that have like 28 students. Forgive me. And then we have some other classes that have fewer. We have some AP classes that are a little smaller than that. Some of the arts are a little smaller. But that's a very solid, for a 9-12 school, that is a solid
Have we calculated
the what?
a student to administrator ratio?
It was a while ago. I can look that up. We haven't done it. It's pretty easy to do. And we had a spreadsheet, so I could find that. I don't think it's changed much because we haven't added people. I think it would be good analysis to do when we see what happens, because some school districts are cutting some administrative positions. But this is 3 years ago when we did it, and that's what we found. And I have had people say, well, somebody said to me, well, if you cut anybody in central office, you wouldn't have anybody there. We have a very light bench at central office, and that's purposeful. We want to be spending money in schools on students, not on administrative people. You do need administration, but we have for many years, put the priority to classrooms and students. We typically put this into our informational slides, but these are some big capital projects or building projects that we're going to have done, next year if the budget passes. The Smiley has 2 boilers. One is 55 years old, and then the other one is about 35. So it's time for an upgrade. They're good, but they're losing their efficiency. We have to fix them more, and it's just time. They've outlived their useful life. We have been incrementally replacing the original floors at the high school, and which again, they've been really good, but they're starting to fail. And but through good maintenance, they've lasted, since 1969. That's not bad.
Are we hiring all this out?
Yes, yeah. Well, the epoxy floor definitely. We did the 400 wing last year, and that we talked a little bit about our stormwater systems, where there is a law that says that if you have more than 3 acres on a site, and the certain conditions on the site, you have to have a stormwater mitigation system. And right now there's money, supposedly, there'll be a 90-10 split, but some of these are very expensive. So even 10% is a lot of money. So we're estimating that we're going to need about $80,000 for our share to get these done this summer. This is something you have to do. You don't have a choice. Last year we were going to have more done, but the projects ended up coming up in higher and they didn't get enough bids. So they couldn't even get the people to do the bids. We did get one done, that was at Jericho. So that's done. And that was probably the least complicated. And then, now we're getting pretty technical, but we have zone valves that they have to be replaced in this building. And again, some of them are old. And so those are the big projects we have. and Nicole's gonna take over at the budget drivers. I mean, I could stand up here all night, people know that. I'm gonna share. You know. Right.
I'm gonna sit because I don't have any pictures of cute children on my slides. So we'll jump into the budget drivers. John's already touched on some of these a bit. We'll start to the left here. So a couple decreases in the budget as we continue to pay down our debt. We're seeing some nice reduction there, about 146,000. The second category is a little bit of a melting pot. We did reduce a transfer to the capital reserve, which we've done the last few years. We reduced some of our transfer to child nutrition. We've reduced the purchase of one school bus. We typically budget for 3. We're budgeting for 2. John talked about the 1.7 FTE reduction, and then just the miscellaneous is really just John and myself combing through line by line, travel and supplies and textbooks, just where we were seeing us not utilizing our full FY24 budget, where the spend was coming in under. We reduced those for next year. And then the 2 biggest increases, budget driver increases, again, are the health insurance. The 11.9% is 815,000, and we are using a 2.5% placeholder for salaries and wages, and that is just over $1 million. Oh, there it is. So this chart is just showing our total budget comparison over the last 3 years. So this is not education spending, this is total expenditures. And you'll notice the 1.94% is considerably smaller than the increase we saw in 24 and 25. Go to the next one. And like John said, education spending is really what's driving property tax rates. So again, education spending is up only 1.32% this year, much smaller than increases that we saw in 24 and 25. So we feel really good about that. Go to the next one. There's a lot of words on the screen, so we'll just.
Oh boy, this was me. But I didn't, I'm not to interrupt,
No,
but I did not know how to distill this because it's kind of complicated.
I won't read through it all, but we really felt it was important to touch on the 5.95% that folks are going to see on the ballot. So we've been stressing tonight that the 1.32% increase in education spending is really what's affecting your tax rate. However, due to the reduction in economically disadvantaged pupils, due to that weighting category where we lost so many pupils, it's making our education spending per student look like it's going up significantly, the 5.95%. Again, like John said, we've reached out to the legislators and Secretary of Ed, and we don't know if they're going to do anything about it, but we know that for folks who don't attend the informational meetings or read the flyer, that is what they're going to see on the ballot, and it's concerning.
Isn't this driven by Act 127?
So
It doesn't seem like a surprise. I think when they say
No.
it's unintended consequences,
Uh,
I thought that they
Why
engineered it
they-
that way.
No, we started 127 last year,
Yeah,
so we should have had a pretty comparable number last year to this year. But they changed how they determine economically disadvantaged students,
So
how they weight them. And so that,
and I got another sort of ping.
well, I mean, that is what I have shared with some folks, that I worry it'll impact districts differently. That's why the Deputy Secretary of Ed acknowledged that and said that Jill Briggs Campbell was going to send this to the Joint Fiscal Office So they could do an analysis of how it impacts different districts differently. I mean, really, you cannot compare the two because it's a totally different, it's a different methodology for that. And the legislature, to their, sticking up for the legislature a little bit, they didn't know about this. They didn't know this was going to change.
We
And
didn't
they
know
would,
about this.
and we definitely didn't know. They did not communicate this to us. We had to figure it out on our own. And I don't believe that the legislature would have added this back in because for 3 years it wasn't on the warning or on the ballot. But they added it back in last year, and the legislators I've talked to didn't know that this could have happened or would have happened. It was unforeseen.
May I?
Sure, absolutely.
So last year, the way that students qualified for the weighting was based in the COVID era numbers. So it was based on 2019 figures. And this year it's based on current data. So more students were covered, and it was a higher, the federal poverty number multiplier was higher. So everybody thought that it was going to be apples to apples this year with the same students counting in the same way. And that is not how students were actually counted this year. So there was a big ripple, but there wasn't enough time to actually change the ballot language. So many districts across the state are trying to explain this to their taxpayers.
When Edie says last year how students were eligible, you might remember the conversation we had maybe 1 or 2 meetings ago about the Medicaid eligible students and how when they rolled back those COVID provisions, all of those students fell off. So last year, our economically disadvantaged number was inclusive of this larger group of students who they knew likely were going to fall off. So last year's number was overinflated, and now we're getting hit with that reduction this year. So there just wasn't the foresight last year that that number was inflated.
Basically, the number means nothing,
Right.
You can't compare them.
except to make
Yeah.
everybody pissed off.
You
Yeah.
can't compare them. It's the 5.95% is just not an accurate representation of our spending per pupil when our pupils really have not changed and our education spending is only going up 1.32%. So that's why we wanted to, I won't read through all this and it's here for everyone too, but we just felt like it was really important to touch on that because that's what a lot of people are going to see when they pick up their ballots.
Is there
Unfortunately.
another way that we can talk about it instead of per pupil? Like, that's so misleading. Like, I mean, I guess it's pupil equivalent, but that's kind of.
It's the language that we
Harsh
have
ballot,
to
yeah.
use.
It's, per weighted pupil. So that's why you have to talk about the weighting.
I see.
Um,
And that's also where the total dollar increase is 1.32. Like that's, in my mind, that's what I'm trying to say as opposed to, yes, it looks like this here, but the reality of total dollars is a
Yeah.
much smaller percentage increase.
So if we count the actual students in chairs, it's roughly the same year on year. So that's where the 1.32 is an accurate representation. If you count the weighted students, it's very different because we're counting students differently this year, unanticipated. And so that's why the other number is so much bigger.
Yeah, and the demographic has not changed. That's the other part. I mean, you could make sense of it if we had some big drop in enrollment, but we haven't. Or if our demographic just changed like a ton. And that, hasn't happened either.
And the other thing that I think we talked about at a previous meeting too was that this depends on self-reporting of economic need, right?
Yeah. I mean, some of it is the income form, which when we switched to universal meals,
Yeah.
it became harder to figure out what your free and reduced lunch count is. That's the way it is.
Is it like median in household income for the district or something?
No, it is a certain percentage of the poverty, to the poverty line.
185% of the federal poverty line, plus a few other ways that we could be.
And that's for
And
all
last year was
households.
350%.
That's for all households, right? Because they don't have that specific to who's actually sending students to school.
Right now, the people, and there are a lot of these too, not to get into the weeds, but that we had a lot of students so last year they counted every student that qualified for Medicaid. And this year, one, you gotta do, recertify, and they take a look at your income. And they didn't do that last year, so it's a totally different way of how they're calculating economically disadvantaged. And it does affect every community different, because there are still people that do get direct certification. But that is not our demographic. We don't have a big group like that.
And I think, Allison, so all across the state, families have been dropped from Medicaid, right? So those kids aren't receiving that, but the state administers that, so they have those numbers. That's not relied on self-reporting. So that's why they're able to be more accurate about that amount. That's like the real measure by which we're losing those. Is we're saying like that has to do with poverty rate or that, but if it's truly the Medicaid numbers, that's how they're figured.
Yeah, you might hear us refer to like Medicaid direct certification. The state pulls that information in when they're doing the work of calculating our long-term weighted ADM. So it's hard for John and I too, because we don't even have that list of who was included in that number last year and who is included in there this year. We just don't even have that information. So it's frustrating.
It's very frustrating, and I have not certified the numbers. I've told them I'm not going to.
Do you want to explain what that is, because you've never had to do that?
Right, so this year they asked us to certify these long-term weighted ADM numbers, and I essentially wrote back and said, I'm not doing it. One, we can't verify what students are in or out. So we don't even know. And then I just think this is not an accurate comparison. You can't compare, the 2 years, because they're very, very different. So I have not certified it. I'm sure I won't, because I can't verify the numbers. I really have no way to. But I'm not the only superintendent. Many others have said, look, we can't even tell if Johnny Alberghini is in there. So it is not a good system at this point.
Don't worry, it'll change.
Does everyone feel
Next year,
at least
we'll do.
somewhat comfortable with that? We can move on. Okay. So in an effort to not confuse folks with the entire homestead tax rate calculation and being unable to compare 25 to 26, we just put up the tax rates with CLA included by town. We put 25 and 26 up there and are showing the dollar change. You can see it's varying a bit across our 5 towns. And then in the far right column, just to give taxpayers an idea of what the increase or decrease will look like per 100,000. That title at the top should say increase or decrease, because we do have some towns that are decreasing. And just to, possibly jump ahead of the question that might come up is, why are we seeing such variability across our 5 towns? And that's really due to the change in the CLA rate year over year. So Underhill and Bolton, who are seeing that small increase, their CLA percentage from 25 to 26 changed by double digits, a double-digit increase in the CLA. So that's why they're experiencing a slight increase as compared to Richmond and Huntington and Jericho.
Does that have anything to do when the property reassessments happen, right? Knowing a couple of the towns were reassessed in the last,
Don't think
like more recently than other towns.
Mhm. Yeah, and we actually did have the appraisal dates in there, but it felt like a lot of information, so we removed them. It's Underhill was reappraised in 22, Richmond and Bolton both in 23. So I think it's not necessarily a factor of the reappraisal, but more so what the 3-year average of those homes have been selling for. If that makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in, sometimes small towns, they might sell 7 houses. And so depending on what the, the house value is, it could, it could be bigger than other towns. And so you get further away from what the state says is a fair market value.
Because with CLA of 100% essentially is saying that every home in that town is valued at fair market value. So when I say that those towns changed by double digits, it means it got farther away from that 100%. So you have that much more of an adjustment to equalize that tax rate to fair market value. Does that make sense?
Which is an impossible number to determine because fair market value is whatever someone's willing to pay for that house. There's no rhyme or reason to it. Yeah, there's factors and drivers, right? But I mean, the reality is someone might just say, I'm gonna spend an extra $50,000 to buy this house because I'm gonna beat out Allison to get that house.
And if you're in a small town, that will affect your CLA. Because it's not like Williston who might sell thousands of houses, or, it really can have a big impact. It's a 3-year rolling average. So it can really have an impact. I mean, we don't like to see any increase in the tax rate, but this is very, very different than last year, like by a magnitude.
It's nice to see some decreases up there with the environment that we're in currently. We'll go to the next one. Questions? John, do we want to look at the additional slide 19 of what things would look like?
Yeah, well, I always put backup slides in, so, so.
More pictures.
Right. No, there's no pictures, but, I like, just to give people more information. I mean, we're not gonna go through all of them, but this one we thought was pretty impactful, but we didn't want to confuse things, so we put it in the backup. So if we did not lose those 120 economically, those 120 long-term weighted pupils, this is what would be happening to the tax rate. That's a big difference.
It's gonna make people mad.
It's a balance of not wanting to confuse, not wanting to make people frustrated, but also this is the reality of the situation. And if something was done more timely, this could be the reality.
I mean, they should have controlled for this last year, right? And they didn't.
They should control it.
My computer wants you to talk to it.
So you're right. I mean, this is, it's a backup slide.
Who presented the new budget? Who like, you're talking about things like snuck in at 5.95. Who presented that?
So the 5.95 is in statute on how the budget language has to be for folks to vote on. And so it's the percent per student has to be percent change. Sorry, that's right. Percent change for our weighted student cost year on year.
Right.
Because the legislature thought that it would be using the exact same way that we were calculating students. So we are using the same way that we're calculating them, but we're just not using the same way that we're weighting them.
Okay, so
Even
let me raise the question.
for half of
Who
the,
changed the weighting system?
Act 127, the legislature last year.
And then COVID, because
Right.
we had a lot more students qualified to be in that category when we were using the COVID calculations. But we came out of COVID
And they didn't think there would be a change?
and nobody flagged it. Nobody,
That's, okay, all
nobody
right, so just
flagged
an
it.
overlook
nobody
in
flagged
the
it.
detail of
Yes.
COVID.
Nobody who did it, who does the detail flagged it to the legislature
Gotcha.
when the law was being changed. In testimony in any way, had it been flagged, it would have not
Right.
like this.
Not to hit you with more numbers, but I think I shared last time that someone from the AOE told me that when the COVID era provisions were rolled back and the students fell off that Medicaid list, it was like 36,000 students,
Yeah.
individuals. I mean, it's significant.
Yeah, it's a big drop.
And so, like John said, it's not just our district. Those 36,000 students are affecting many districts' long-term weighted APM.
Phil had a question, Nicole, if you could ask, if you could share just a little bit more about the differences between towns and the tax rate. Can you go
So
that slowly?
I guess I'll repeat what I said, Phil, and if that doesn't make sense or we need to go into further detail, just let me know. But so the reason, for example, that Underhill and Bolton are experiencing a little bit larger of an increase than some of the other towns is due to the CLA, the common level of appraisal, how that's changed year over year. So I have the numbers here in front of me. For example, and this is an unadjusted CLA, so that's what makes things a little bit more complicated. But Underhill's CLA last year was 97% and Bolton's was 104%. So kind of right at that perfect 100% fair market value. And when we look at the unadjusted CLA, they dropped 13% and 13.8% respectively. So they fell further away from fair market value than Jericho, Underhill, and Huntington did. So they're seeing that much more of the impact of the CLA adjustment to get those towns to fair market value.
And just to, the common level of appraisal is the way the state calculates the value of property so that we're roughly comparing apples to apples in home value across the state.
To ensure that every town is paying their fair share.
And Richmond and Bolton's tax rate is lower than the others, too. Which is kind of important. It's very important, actually.
Is that helpful, Phil? Great.
Yeah, sometimes we assume a level of knowledge when we explain, and so if we need to back up, then please ask those questions. This is, the complexity is designed to make it more fair, but it's still incredibly complex, so.
I was gonna make sure, before we move on from CLA and, so obviously one big driver is 120 students are now sort of out of our count. That was a huge factor. 12% increase in health costs. Could you speculate like what that would look like if it was a reasonable 3 or 4%? Like, I feel like the conversation as we go to the community is, here are the two biggest factors. One is completely out of our hand, the state changed the calculation. And the other one is also out of our hand because the state is negotiating healthcare costs. Like how much, I can see the, I guess maybe I can see the dollar amount with the 120 students that are now off our equalized weighted number, thank you. But the healthcare seems like a pretty easy one to just be like 12% versus 3 or 4%. I mean, is that a huge number or?
Yeah, if we're talking 3 or 4%, I'm guessing like 275 to 300,000 dollars versus
800.
815.
So it's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Other questions? I know you're here, do you have questions, or did you just?
I just wanted to learn. If you go back to the tax rate slide, actually, one of the things that is confusing by this slide is it's not correlated with the CLA percentage basis on the increase or decrease. Like you would think that all the towns that are way above CLA would see the similar impact, but it's not the case. I think it's because of the year-over-year aspect of it versus where the CLA is today. But I think it'd be helpful to show the year-over-year change because it actually impacts the tax rate, right?
Yeah, another,
Except.
we didn't really get into
You're
it.
100% right, except.
One of the changes this year in the CLA is, so the district has always and continues to calculate our homestead tax rate, and then you layer CLA in by town. And in years past, I'll speak to last year specifically, we saw a really modest increase in the homestead tax rate. And then you layered in CLA, the 17-18%, and that's where you saw tax rates kind of fly way up. So in an effort to, AOE's verbiage, not mine, not make the CLA the boogeyman, they applied a statewide adjustment. They basically took all of the CLAs in the state, took an average, which I believe was 72.3%, and applied that average to these CLA rates. They applied the average to the yield, which is an element of the tax rate calculation, and they also applied it to the tax rate discount that we received as part of Act 127. So it's hard to compare another apples to oranges, because if I put what the CLA was in 25 versus this state adjusted CLA in 26, again, you can't compare them. And that's why when I was saying how towns' CLA tax rates have changed, Underhill and Bolton by double digits, I'm looking at the CLA from 25 and the unadjusted CLA from 26. So it does get complicated when you see, Underhill here at 116 and Bolton at 124, that, that looks really good. There's that much over fair market value, but those two are also adjusted by 72.3%.
Got it.
Trust me.
Next year, it's gonna be apples to apples, maybe.
Maybe.
And how does home building impact this? Because the tax base increases as you add homes, right?
Yes.
But is that like a trivial factor because of the rate of home building, or is that actually a material factor in the tax rate?
I'm not positive.
I don't know.
Depends.
It does depend. I'm not,
If we built, for example, in Jericho,
Yeah.
a 5-story condo complex where every unit was valued at $300,000. And it was, like 50, 70 units, and they all sold in the same year, that would impact the CLA, right? But a house here, a house there, the way we build today, it doesn't make as much.
Yeah. Well, it's not just the CLA, it's also the dollars impact. You can tax that property, right?
Yes, yeah, so the grand list, every time we grow the grand list,
Yeah.
it helps the state have more money for education.
Right.
And so that decreases everybody's cost, because there are more people paying in, there's more tax dollars going in. As long as we don't increase the spend.
And I
And
think my other question, which is unrelated to this, was about the weighted pupil piece. So because this district lost those weighted pupils, that means less state money comes in, right? So we can make it up. Is that the way to think about it?
was tax capacity.
we lost tax capacity. Our district lost the ability to receive additional ed funding
Right.
from the ed fund.
Yeah, so the state puts less money in the district, we have to make it up with our own dollars, basically.
There are other districts on the other side of the coin, though, who were not disadvantaged.
Which they kind of have ahead.
Before I forget, we did look at a couple things too that are gonna be in the flyer, which is our ed spending per pupil is the second lowest in the county, just under Milton.
our ed spending per pupil where we had a significant reduction in our pupils.
Yep.
So that's
And that's another critical number. And when I did have a look at the increases by town and in our county, and we're one of the lowest. Some are going up much more, much.
This is getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but I think it's just important because what you said, Edie, just in terms of like, the school does not determine the building patterns for our district nor our county. And I think this is a really important piece in terms of when we look at the viability of our district and of our schools, like select board members out there, people on the planning commission, right? I think there needs to be a really like concerted effort around like, how do we grow that grand list so that we can sort of spread the dollars around, because there really just is like, it's a private industry, right? Home building is not, at least in Vermont for the most part, highly subsidized. And so unless we have more people coming to our district and living here and having families and sending kids to the schools, that number isn't going to change. Like that population number is not going to change. The demographic aspect, not disadvantaged students, isn't going to change. So there needs to be like a bigger conversation about how we are funding our schools, and our, one of our biggest drivers is like, we're flat. We just don't have new students coming in, and affordable housing for people to be able to live here and work here.
Other questions on the budget?
I would just say it's pretty impressive to keep the budget under 2% increase in an inflationary environment that we have here, so good job.
Thank you. Tell everyone.
For the record, can we get your name and the town?
Yeah, I'm Jonathan Klein, I live in Richmond.
Great, thanks. And if you wanted to write a front porch forum post,
You'd appreciate it.
very happy.
It's true though, because most people will not be paying attention to this till they're at the polls, and then we don't have the opportunity to get all of this very complicated information through.
Unless we have tables at every polling booth with school board members, they're explaining it. Just throwing that out there.
Is that political campaigning though?
No,
It's really useful.
It's an informational.
yeah, we did it last year. Katie and I did it last year in Richmond to tell everybody that they weren't voting on the budget on town meeting day. It was well received.
So
So,
people had real questions that we could answer.
yeah.
So community engagement committee would like for you to do that.
John, maybe speak out for whatever questions.
So Bill, if you wouldn't mind putting your town into the chat, so Pat can have that for the record, because we did ask your question. And board members, I think we're ready to move on and come out of this community meeting session. We are, yes, we have no more questions. Thank you, Phil. Hope you got that, Pat, Underhill.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you. Okay, so there will be another community budget information session at,
Mount Mansfield Union High School at 6 p.m. in a virtual option.
Thank you, appreciate it.
and that's going to be on the 27th of February, which is a Thursday. So not a regular board meeting. Board members do not have to be there. You are invited to it. John.
We have more kids slides?
I have a lot of pictures.
One picture of you with
I have a couple of those too.
Can I get a motion to appoint Michelle Patnode as the principal of Brewster Pierce Memorial?
I make a motion that we accept Michelle Patnode as our Brewster Pierce principal.
Is there a second? Thank you, Heather. Any discussion? Yeah.
And I would just like to say it was a great process. Once again, big shout out to Rebecca for organizing the group. Michelle is fantastic. She's well loved in her first kind of not even full year. So she's been there for the school year up to date, and I think the community is really excited to have her continue.
Great. Any other conversation, comments, questions? Okay, all in favor of Michelle as principal of the high school, give me an eye or a thumb.
Of the what?
Of the what?
Brewster Pierce.
Brewster Pierce.
Oh my God. And Michelle as the principal of Brewster Pierce Memorial School, thank you for listening.
Mike Weston might be
Coming.
surprised. Don't blame it on me.
I think I'm the one to blame, but we're going with Brewster Pierce.
Brewster Pierce.
Brewster Pierce.
Having given thumbs up.
I saw a bunch of thumbs when I said the wrong.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Opposed. Any abstentions? Right, great, unanimous. Thank you, everybody. We're all very excited. Yeah. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from January 27th? Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Katie, for seconding. Any discussion on the minutes?
Yeah.
All in favor? I think we're voting already. All in favor of approving? Any abstentions? Can I go with abstention? Any abstentions? Any opposed? Okay, it is approved unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Any other business?
Just had one brief thing.
Yeah.
This just came across my radar because it kind of links to some of the discussion tonight, but I did get a call from the town planner of Jericho.
Yeah.
And the select board met last week. I haven't had a chance to look at the video or even read the minutes, but they were talking about septic sites. And one of the sites that they identified was Browns River for a,
Bigger study.
a bigger study. So they probably are going to want to come to the Finance Facilities Committee meeting to talk about that. But that's all I know at this point.
So that is something that we agreed that they could use earlier in the planning session last year.
Yeah, they,
Year
yes,
they identified a few sites. Some of them were on some of our properties. And we said for planning purposes, we are saying, yes, you could put it in your plan, but we will have further discussions before anything goes forward. So the Finance and Facilities Committee will be taking lead on this, but this will be a full board discussion as we go forward if this is something that we need to do.
they've done the feasibility study is complete. And then they'll talk about next steps.
Great.
With the Finance and Facilities Committee.
I would like to schedule a special meeting for next Monday, the 17th, from 6:30 to 7 p.m. in person or virtual.
Okay.
If you could find a location for us, John,
Sure
that's
can.
my other business.
Sure.
Awesome, thank you. Short executive session at the beginning of that meeting, and then a short. Great.
What time you said?
6:30, and I'm hoping we're done at 7. That's my goal. Total meeting, everything. Any other business? Okay, then can I get a motion to go into executive session for personnel issues? So we can talk about the superintendent evaluation.
Make a motion to go into executive session.
It's my last one, so take it easy on me.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, all in favor, a thumb or some kind of indication in favor? Great. Okay, so going into executive session it'll be 7:08 by the time we get out of this meeting and go into the next one. Everybody remote should have gotten an invitation to an executive session, and it'll take us a couple minutes to get there, so please join us there. Thank you. Anybody else who is here for the meeting?
Are you guys welcome to stay for that?
Yeah.
Or do they leave? Okay, I thought so.
Okay.
Keep doing stuff.